Ah, Bara town. Listen. That's the sound of contented village folk, without a care in the world, going about their everyday lives. It's easy to get caught up in the sorrows of the world. I'm no stranger to that. But here in Bara town, you can leave that all behind. Oh, hello. And again. Wait. Give me a second. This is Foundation, and I am Lord Bara. Back to work, I guess. There's me thinking I was going to have a nice relaxing day. I suppose there's no rest for the wicked. What I'm going to do is try to complete a handful of missions. I'll kick it off with one from the bishop here. Looks like I have everything I need except herbs, so let's start off by trying to sort that out, shall we? Now, for the uninitiated, herbs are produced by monks and nuns that are gathering in the monastery. The other two products that they want are berries and bread, which I have enough of already. So I don't need to worry about that. I just need to... Oh, here's another one. They want tools. Let's see if we can sweeten the deal. Tools are precious. Oh, actually a little bit disappointed by that. I thought it was going to be a bit better. You know what? Forget it. Don't need to do that. I'm not in need of any labour prosperity. All I need to do is go to my resource list and hit stockpile on the products that they want. That might take a while. So while that's happening, I'll just go about busying myself in the town and do a few bits and pieces here and there. And if you stick around, I'll tell you about my favourite baker that lives in Bara town. Under a sleepy morning light, we find Davith bustling around in his bakery. A cosy, stone-walled nook tucked on Bara's main street. The smell of fresh baked bread and honeyed pastries drifts through the open window, as if calling to the village with a warm invitation that he hoped would bring in just a few more customers than his competitor across the street. Davith glanced out of his shop's front window to the rival bakery. It was a slightly larger, busier establishment, with bright flags hung above the door. Named the Bread Basket and owned by Eli the Elder. And he had a knack for stirring up excitement about his goods. He was placing a sign outside the front of his shop to promote his May Day treats, much to Davith's dismay. He saw him greet someone across the way and beckon them in. Davith sighed and looked down at his own work. A row of lovingly formed pastries, all gleaming with a fresh honey glaze. He was a plump man with hands made for gentle, precise work. They were braids and twists, each piece a tiny work of art. But he was a shy man who preferred to let his work speak for itself. And it did. For without fail, when a customer stepped inside, they never left empty-handed. This year was different though. He was determined. With May Day only a few days away, he knew he had a rare opportunity. And this year he would win Bara's best baker. Though he knew Eli wouldn't make it easy, he was determined to make a lasting impression. He'd spent hours perfecting his recipes, crafting new flavours with delicate herbs and crushed berries from the nearby forest. All he needed now was a bit of courage. Yes, this would be the year. If he could just keep himself focused, keep his nerves at bay, he might just show Bara that he was the best bakery in town, and not the one across the street. As Davith moved between the ovens, lost in his thoughts about Mayday and his rival across the street, Aldith worked steadily beside him. She'd been part of the bakery's morning routine for many years, arriving even before dawn to help prepare doughs, glaze pastries, and ensure every tray was filled just right. In her quiet, unassuming way, Aldith was as much a fixture of the bakery as Davith himself. She worked with a diligent grace, always attentive, always a few steps ahead in knowing what needed to be done. Aldith was focused, setting out fresh pastries, brushing them with a sheen of egg wash until they caught the early light of the golden glow of the sun. There was a warmth about her that made even the busiest mornings feel calm and steady. Though Davith didn't always notice, Aldith's quiet attention to detail had saved him more times than he could count. This morning, she kneaded dough by the window. Her gentle presence filled the bakery with a soft glow filtering in through them. She glanced over occasionally, noticing Davith's anxious glances towards the bakery across the street, but she said nothing. She knew well enough to understand the pressure he felt each Mayday. It was then that the bakery bell gave a cheerful jingle, and in walked O'Daniel, the young miner with dusty boots. He was a regular in the bakery, known to come in the mornings for a loaf to tuck into his bag before heading off for a day's toil. "Morning, Davith," he greeted, tipping an imaginary hat as he nodded to each of them. Aldith pulled a fresh loaf from one of the shelves, without even being asked. O'Daniel gave a laugh, running a hand over his stubbled jaw. "You know me too well, Aldith," he said, reaching into his pocket to fish out a coin. Looking over the counter to the trays stacked high with pastries, he let out a low whistle. "You're really pulling out the stops this Mayday, eh?" "Oh, it's all Davith's doing," Aldith replied with a small smile, her eyes bright as she wrapped up the loaf for O'Daniel. "He's determined to make this year's festival one to remember." "Ha! That's so!" O'Daniel's eyes lit up, catching Davith's uncertain glance. "Well, I say it's high time you won that bake-off." As Aldith handed him the wrapped loaf, O'Daniel hesitated for a moment, letting in a friendly grin. "Are you two going to the May dance?" Aldith's face turned a little pink as she looked down at her flour-dusted hands. Davith simply said, "With who?" Just then, the bell above the door jingled again, announcing the arrival this time of Battestina. She strode in with her usual easy confidence. Her eyes bright and her cheeks pink from the morning chill, her hair loosely tumbling over her shoulders, she brings the aroma of forest flowers. Her carefree wildness made her instantly recognizable, and the moment she stepped inside, Davith's posture straightened, and he instinctively wiped his hands on his apron as if to make himself a little more presentable. "Morning, Davith. Morning, Aldith," Battestina greeted, her smile warm and friendly as she gave a cheerful wave. She seemed to carry the freshness of the forest with her. Glancing around, her eyes settled on the pastries with open admiration. "These look lovely. I'll have 2 of those, and 6 loaves if you have any left." Davith, managing a shy nod, his cheeks taking on a faint shade of red as he quickly selected 2 of the freshest buns. "Oh yes, absolutely. Just baked this morning," he said, barely trusting his own voice. He carefully wrapped the loaves, hands steady but his gaze avoiding hers, as though he feared that a single look might give him away entirely. O'Daniel was lingering by the counter with a roguish grin. He watched the exchange with amusement, noting how Davith's face had gone pink the instant Battestina walked in. He leaned back, arms crossed, with an expression that clearly said he was enjoying the scene more than he should. As Davith handed her the bread, Battestina tilted her head thoughtfully, wanting to break the silence with a casual smile, her lips curled. "So, Davith, will we be seeing you at the May Day fair? She asked, her tone light. Wouldn't be the same without your baker's touch, after all. Davith stammered slightly, rubbing the back of his neck. Oh, I suppose, yes. If I can get everything ready, I might. Though he couldn't bring himself to look directly at her, his gaze flitting instead to Daniel, who gave him an encouraging nod that only made Davith blush harder. Good. I'll keep an eye out then, she said with a playful wink before turning to leave. Her footsteps light as she swung the door open and let the cool morning air in. Thank you for the bread, Davith. With a final wave, Battestina disappeared out of the door, leaving Davith standing there, clutching his apron, with a mix of wonder and relief that he'd survived the conversation. He watched her walk away, perhaps a little too long. O'Daniel chuckled softly. Well, O'Daniel teased, leaning on the counter with a smirk. Looks like you've got some plans for May Day after all. Davith gave him a helpless smile, his blush still bright. Maybe, he murmured, feeling a small spark of hope amid his nerves. Aldith was quiet but attentive. She continued her work nearby. She never looked up from her task. The days leading up to May Day swept by in a flurry of flour, kneading, and the aroma of warm spices filled every corner of Davith's bakery. Each morning, as soon as dawn touched the cobbled streets of Bara, Davith and Aldith dove straight into preparation. Davith had set his sights on a full display at the festival, envisioning a spread that would make the village pause with admiration and perhaps help him earn the coveted Bara bread trophy, a prize awarded each year to the baker with the most crowd-favoured creations. Aldith was at his side every moment, quietly determined and tirelessly efficient. She seemed to anticipate his needs before he even voiced them, keeping trays moving in and out of the ovens, adding a final dusting of powdered sugar here or a delicate sprinkle of herbs there. Her focus never wavered. Her diligence grounded Davith whenever he felt his nerves prickling. And though she didn't speak much, as they worked, her presence was a steady warmth, keeping him from getting lost in his thoughts of rivalry, festival crowds, or the fleeting memory of Battestina's playful wink. Every so often, though, the bakery's windows would open and Davith would catch a glimpse of Eli across the street, busying about with his own plans. Eli had raised the bakery's stakes this year, stringing ribbons and hanging banners that trumpeted "Best Bread in Bara." He had the entire street abuzz with his preparations. He'd been milling grains out front, handing out samples, even rehearsing an elaborate sign he would place at his stall at the festival. Davith tried not to stare, but it was hard to ignore the parade of villagers being wooed by Eli's showmanship, especially as each passerby glanced towards Davith's bakery with what seemed to him a curious, hesitant expression. Aldith put her hand on Davith's shoulder. "Don't worry. We'll win this," she said, reassuringly. As he locked up that night, Davith couldn't help but feel a renewed spark of hope for the festival. Despite the competition, despite his nerves, he was starting to believe that with Aldith by his side and the right mix of courage, this May Day might just be the year after all. But that night he just couldn't sleep. Though the streets of Bara outside had settled into a gentle hush, he slipped into the back room, where the sacks of flour were stacked high along the wall. And under the dim glow of candlelight and moonlight filtering in through the window, he grinned to himself, and lifting an empty flour sack, held at arm's length, in that moment he saw himself not as the village baker, but as a proud May Day reveller, spinning and twirling in time with the music that would play at the festival. He gave the sack a gentle twirl, his feet tapping and shuffling in his best attempt at a lively dance. His flour-coated hands left faint marks on his vest, but he didn't care. For once, he felt his shy nature fall away, letting his steps grow bolder, his smile wider. If you had been a mouse nestled in the corner of that back room, you might have seen Davith looking happier and more carefree than ever, gliding across the dusty floor in perfect, unpracticed time. And perhaps you would have thought that he was the most excited man in the entire town, his heart light with anticipation for a dance he hoped he'd finally be brave enough to take. Well, it wasn't long before the May Day fair dawned bright and clear, with the sky so blue it felt as though Bara had been wrapped in celebration itself. Villagers gathered in cheerful clusters around the stalls, each one bustling with laughter, chatter, and eager anticipation for the treats, games, and dancing that would fill the day. Davith's stall was arranged meticulously under Aldith's watchful eye, and it was a sight to behold. The display was brimming with pastries, breads, and sweets, each one crafted with a level of care and attention that didn't go unnoticed. Honeyed loaves glistened with a delicate sheen, berry-filled pastries sat nestled in paper wrappers, and golden rolls were stacked in inviting pyramids. And among all stood Davith, his face glowing with both pride and relief, as villagers flocked to his stall, delighted with every bite they took. "Davith, this is splendid!" someone exclaimed as they sampled a honey roll, and another voice chimed in, "The best bread yet! I'll be back for more!" He could barely keep up with the compliments, each one more welcoming than the last. Aldith, standing just behind him, had a quiet smile on her face, her satisfaction evident as she helped keep the trays replenished and the stall running smoothly. Just then, the baker from across the street wandered over to the stall, chewing thoughtfully on a bite of Davith's honeyed glazed loaf. He was a stout man with a gruff manner, but he nodded approvingly as he savoured the taste. "I'll hand it to you, Davith," he said, glancing around at the crowd gathering at the stall. "You've done well this year. That honeyed glaze," he shook his head with a grudging smile, "it's remarkable. Though, don't think I won't give you a run for your money. This year's competition will be close." Davith chuckled, feeling a strange sort of camaraderie with Eli in that moment. "I wouldn't expect any less," he replied, feeling a rush of pride at the unexpected praise. "May the best baker win." They shared a nod, an understanding passing between them, one that hinted at a rivalry but also a shared dedication to their craft. With a final nod, Eli wandered back to his own stall, leaving Davith and Aldith to take the scene in around them. The morning continued in a blur of laughter and compliments, and Davith's stall remaining one of the busiest in the square. As the crowd began to settle in for the afternoon festivities, Davith looked around, feeling for the first time that his work had truly spoken for itself. The proof in that was when some monks from Middle arrived, their dark robes stark against the village's festive colours. They'd come to investigate the recent chapel fire, yet the scent of freshly baked bread softened their expressions. Drawn to the honeyed loaves, a tall monk took a tentative bite and smiled. It's delightful," he murmured, prompting his brothers to try the bread too, their solemn faces easing as they savoured each bite. One monk lingered as they left. "Thank you. Your bread reminds me of simpler times," he said warmly. As the day drew on, the sound of music and laughter filled the air, but it wasn't long before the judges made their rounds and the much-anticipated announcement of the Bara bread trophy was made. The crowd buzzed with excitement, eager to know who would claim the coveted prize. And when the announcement came, it was Eli, the baker from across the street, who was declared the winner. "Well played, Davith," Eli said. "Your breads were exceptional this year, I'll give you that. Really, well done. Better luck next time." Eli's eyes shifted briefly over to Aldith before he had a chance to reply, who was tidying up the last few things on the stall. Her brow furrowed in concentration. A glint of opportunity flashed in a blaze before his eyes, and he spoke again, this time with a casual, almost rehearsed tone. "You know," he said, rubbing his chin, "if Aldith ever gets tired of working for you, she's always welcome to come work for me. I could use someone like her, and I pay better too." Aldith, who'd been listening from just a few steps away, didn't even glance up. Her expression was calm, her movements precise, but there was a quiet resolve in her demeanour. Without missing a beat, she looked Eli square in the eye and shook her head. "I'm happy where I am, Eli, thank you, but no." Her voice was firm, not unkind, but it left no room for argument. Eli's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Well," he said, "if you ever change your mind, it'd be nice to have someone in my shop." He turned to leave. "Good luck next year, Davith." He walked off back to his own stall to pack his own things away. Dusk came, and their stall reduced to naught but crumbs, they began to pack away. Aldith was wiping and packing when Davith's gaze drifted across the square, and there, standing by herself near the maypole, was Battestina, her hands idly tracing patterns in the air as she watched the dancers. An unfamiliar surge of determination rushed through him, and he turned to Aldith, his voice barely steady. "Aldith, would you mind finishing up here?" She paused, glancing at him with a faint look of surprise. "Of course." Davith swallowed, nerves buzzing in his chest as he took a step towards Battestina. The world seemed to narrow around him, the din of the fair fading as he moved closer, one foot after the other, his heart pounding harder with every step. When he reached her, he opened his mouth to speak. But his voice caught, and for a second he felt all of his courage slip away. She looked over, her eyes meeting him with that familiar sparkle, and suddenly he found his words. "Battestina," he managed, his voice quiet but steady. Would you like to dance?" For a brief moment she seemed to consider, her head tilting as if studying him with a faint, amusing smile. Then, with a small shake of her head, she let out a soft laugh. "Oh, Davith," she said, her tone gentle but unmistakably dismissive. "You're sweet. But I've just promised the next dance to the woodcutter." She gestured to a tall, broad-shouldered young man nearby, who was waving her over with a grin. Davith's face fell, his cheeks burning as he stammered a polite nod, trying to muster a smile. Of course," he said quietly, stepping back. "Enjoy your dance." As she moved away, joining the woodcutter with a carefree laugh, Davith felt the sting of disappointment settle in his chest. He turned, wanting nothing more than to escape the lively crowd, his mind already retreating to the familiar, comforting space of his bakery. As he made his way back to the stall, he found Aldith standing there, just finishing up. A single golden curl leant against her cheek, and her eyes widened as he approached. "Everything all right?" she asked softly, her voice kind but light. "Not exactly," he shrugged. Aldith offered him a hand, her gaze warm and steady. "Well then, how about a dance with an old friend?" she said, with a smile. Well, that's all I've got time for. But between me and you, I thought Davith's pastries were better than Eli's. Before I go, I'll just say thank you for listening, thank you for watching, if you have been. Leave a like. This has been Foundation, and I have been Lord Bara.